Have you ever felt like you're constantly giving explanations no one asked for? As if every step you take, every choice you make, every quiet moment you embrace needs to be justified. It's exhausting, isn't it? Maybe you've caught yourself explaining why you're tired, why you didn't want to go out, why you chose to take care of yourself, as if choosing yourself was somehow a betrayal, a sin you must account for. Without even realizing it, you begin to ask for permission to exist. You carry this invisible burden, constantly explaining yourself as if you owe the world an apology for being who you are. It's like walking around with a heavy backpack full of silent regrets. I'm sorry I didn't fit in. I'm sorry I wasn't enough. The more you speak, the further you drift from yourself. We live in a world that teaches us from an early age to please, to adapt, to mold ourselves so we don't make others uncomfortable. So we become masters of justification. We learn to turn our feelings into arguments, into defensive speeches, because somewhere along the way, we were made to believe that our emotions must be validated by others before they can be real. But eventually, something deep inside you whispers, enough. Enough of translating yourself so others can understand. Enough of begging for acceptance disguised as explanation. Sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it's the first act of self-respect, because silence can also be a boundary, a firm, quiet line that says, I no longer need to convince you of my truth. What if true self-love begins at the very moment you stop explaining yourself? Have you ever stopped to ask where this compulsive need comes from? It's not just a habit, it's a wound. There is something ancient within you that fears being misunderstood. Maybe it goes back to your childhood, to that moment when you learned that if you didn't explain yourself well enough, you'd be rejected or, worse, abandoned. So you started overanalyzing every word and action, monitoring your own behavior as if you were walking on a minefield. This is emotional memory echoing through your soul. Don't say that. What will people think? Be quiet. If you act like that, no one will love you. And those words planted a seed of doubt inside you, a doubt that whispers, maybe I'm not enough, as I am. Without realizing it, you begin to live like you constantly need to prove you deserve to be here. But it's not your fault. This is what you learned in order to survive in a world that often punishes vulnerability and glorifies the mask. Still, every mask tightens over time. Eventually, you can't breathe beneath it anymore, because living to be understood is a slow death. You have the right to be yourself even if no one understands you. You have the right to feel without giving explanations. You have the right to exist. We tend to believe that speaking is a way to set ourselves free, but sometimes speaking too much becomes a prison. When you feel the need to explain every no, every decision that breaks expectations, your voice is no longer an expression. It becomes a defense, a shield, a wall, a silent plea to be accepted. You speak from fear, from guilt, from that old belief that if you don't explain everything, you'll lose someone's love. And that kind of speaking drains you. It tires your soul and weighs on your chest. Explaining yourself all the time is like standing trial every day, where you play the accused, the lawyer, and the judge. You punish yourself for feeling what you feel and then struggle to make it all sound acceptable. And still, sometimes they don't believe you. Speaking out of fear is like trying to stop a storm with your bare hands. The words become fragile, nervous, stripped of truth, and your heart, despite all its efforts, remains alone. Your soul knows when you speak from love and when you speak from fear of not being enough. And deep down, you know it too. You feel that difference in your throat, in your stomach, in your chest. And there, in that awareness, a painful but freeing truth emerges. No matter how much you explain, those who don't want to understand you never will. Not because of who you are now, but because they never tried to see you from the beginning. Maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop speaking just to convince and start embracing silence to begin healing. There's a moment in life, a quiet, raw, but beautiful moment, when you realize that silence isn't emptiness. It's a shelter, a place without words where finally you can hear yourself again. I'm not talking about the uncomfortable silence that feels like punishment. I'm speaking about a kind of silence that embraces you, not the absence of sound, but the sacred presence that arrives after countless internal battles. This silence doesn't question your pain, doesn't interrogate your sadness or fears. It doesn't try to fix you or mold you into something more convenient or acceptable. Instead, it meets you exactly where you are and says, you don't have to explain why you feel this way, just rest. And it is in this silence that your soul finally finds a place to breathe, to exhale without fear of being misunderstood. Because speaking can be exhausting, but silence, when chosen consciously, becomes a form of healing. It brings you back to yourself in that sacred space where you no longer feel the need to justify your existence. Something incredible begins to happen. You start to reclaim your voice, not the one you used to speak to the world, but the quiet one within that has always guided you. The voice of your truth, your intuition, your essence. And in that moment, the need for external validation fades away. In its place, you find something far more powerful, the permission to simply be. To be silent is not to run away or surrender. It's to look within and say, without a single word, I believe you. I see you. I choose you. Because not everything has to be understood. There are feelings that are meant to be felt, not translated. There are moments when your silence is not avoidance. It's protection. And there are people in your life who may never deserve the explanation you keep trying to offer them. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to listen. Perhaps in that stillness, your real journey back home begins home not as a place, but as a state of being where you no longer abandon yourself for the sake of others. When was the last time you truly chose yourself without guilt? Choosing yourself is not selfishness. It is emotional survival. It's an act of radical self-respect. It's standing in front of the mirror and saying, no more depletion, no more over-explaining, no more trying to convince others that I am worthy of love. But I know that the day you decide to place yourself first, something inside you shakes because you were taught to please others. And when you finally say no without any justification, the world shifts, the masks fall. Some people walk away, others get angry because you're no longer the version of yourself they constructed to meet their needs. And yes, it hurts, but it's liberation. It's rebirth. Choosing yourself is an act of courage because when you do, you are also saying goodbye to the version of you who waited endlessly to be chosen by others. It may mean standing alone for a while, but the solitude that comes from choosing yourself is not a punishment. It is a cleansing. It is a sacred space to heal, to reconstruct your identity, to remember that your value is not up for negotiation. There's a quiet power in saying, "Today I don't need to explain myself. Today I just need to honor myself." And even if the world doesn't see that moment, it will remain one of the holiest decisions you've ever made. Many of us spent years silent out of fear, not choice. That's a different kind of silence, one that doesn't heal. It suffocates. A silence that wraps around your throat like a knot because you've convinced yourself that speaking up will only bring more pain. Have you felt it? That choking silence where you swallow your truth to avoid conflict, where you bury your feelings just so you don't make anyone uncomfortable. That kind of silence is like swallowing glass, invisible, but sharp enough to break you from within. And worst of all, with time, you get used to it. You become skilled at smiling when you want to scream. You learn to fake calm while chaos rages beneath your skin. But silence born from fear is not peace. It is a quiet war. And that internal war drains your spirit. It steals your glow. It convinces you that you don't have the right to exist fully. Eventually, you lose the ability to identify what you feel because you've silenced yourself for so long. So, what's the difference between the silence that heals and the silence that destroys? One word: intention. The healing silence comes from choosing yourself. The destructive silence comes from fearing the loss of someone else. One whispers, "Today I will care for myself." The other murmurs, "I'm not worthy of being heard." But you are worthy of spaces where your voice doesn't need to defend itself. You deserve relationships where silence is a moment of peace, not a prison. And if you haven't found those spaces yet, be that space. Be the one who listens to your own soul. One day, something inside you will quietly break, not in anger, but in a sacred stillness. A calm knowing will rise in you, and that day, without a big announcement, you will simply say, "Enough," and that day will change you forever, because you will finally realize that you no longer owe anyone an explanation. Not because you feel superior, but because you now understand that anyone who truly loves you doesn't need you to justify your existence. It will be a quiet, holy day where you stop giving reasons for your fatigue, your distance, your boundaries. Because constantly explaining yourself is a form of begging for permission. To stop explaining doesn't mean to close yourself off. It means to open yourself more fully to your truth, to your intuition, to the wisdom within that knows some choices are not made with logic, but with the heart. Because the decisions that come from the soul may not always be rational, but they are always real. And the truth, when it's real, never needs a justification. You begin to see that silence isn't emptiness. It's wholeness. It's telling the world, I no longer live to be understood. I live to simply be. And from that place, you begin to attract people who don't over-explain themselves either because they just feel you. They resonate with you. Some wounds don't bleed, but they speak. They speak without asking permission. Sometimes it's old pain that pushes you to explain too much, as if through words you could stop the pain from returning. But it's not your voice that needs to be heard, it's your wound. Do you remember that time you said, this hurts, and they told you that you were overreacting? When you asked for love and they called you needy? From that moment, your soul learned that in order to be heard, it had to explain itself. And you started repeating yourself, hoping that this time someone would understand, that this time someone would stay. The truth is, you never wanted to talk so much. You just wish someone would say even once, "You don't need to explain. I see you." You long to be accepted without needing a mask. That's why you spoke so much, not for attention, but out of fear of being abandoned. But there's a truth that, even though it hurts, sets you free. The person who doesn't want to see, you won't, no matter how loud you scream. And the one who does want to see you doesn't need you to say a thing, because soul recognizes soul, and that doesn't need to be explained. It's simply felt. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't cure. It's a soul-deep weariness from years spent explaining yourself, trying to be understood by people who never truly wanted to listen. When you share your wounds with someone who only responds with judgment, it hurts. But what hurts more isn't the cold reaction. It's the echo of your soul feeling invisible all over again. Little by little, something inside you starts to fade. You stop talking like before and stop sharing with the same light in your voice. The soul gets tired when it's ignored, when its voice becomes noise to others. And that's when many of us learn to stay silent, not out of choice, but for protection. That's not healing. That's hiding your pain. That's why today I invite you to pause, not to explain yourself, but to hold yourself. Close your eyes and ask, where did I exhaust myself? From talking too much? What do I need now to begin truly listening to myself? Because when you listen with love, when you stop demanding explanations from yourself, that's when real healing begins. We live in a world that demands smiles, a world uncomfortable with raw pain, a world that wants you to say, "I'm fine," even if you're falling apart inside. And you learn to justify your sadness, to explain why you're not okay, hoping people won't walk away when they see your tears, as if feeling deeply was a flaw. But no, pain doesn't need to be explained. Pain deserves to be honored. You don't need to justify your tears, because pain isn't looking for approval. It's looking for presence. It needs space to breathe in your arms, not your arguments. The saddest part is that pain often grows not because of what it feels like, but because of how often you feel forced to justify it. "I'm just tired," you say. "Sorry, it's just stress." Lies dressed as explanations to avoid discomfort. But feeling doesn't make you weak. Denying what you feel, that's what breaks you. So today, let yourself feel without guilt, without explaining, without covering it up. Your pain doesn't need logical proof to be valid. Your soul already knows, and all it's asking of you is to stop fighting with what you feel. Make silence your temple, and within that temple let your pain speak, free of judgment. Here begins true emotional freedom. There's a silent belief that lives in many wounded hearts. The idea that if you open your soul completely, you'll be more loved. And so you share everything, confess your most intimate wounds, hoping someone will hold you tighter. But not everyone is ready to hold your truth. Not everyone has the sensitivity to receive what you've kept quiet for years. And most painfully, not everyone deserves it. Your truth is sacred. It's not a speech to persuade, it's a fire. It can illuminate or it can burn, depending on where you place it. Learning to choose who gets to hear your truth is an act of self-love. It's saying, my story isn't for just anyone. It's for those who know how to honor it. Don't blame yourself for having revealed yourself, but from now on, open up only where your soul feels safe. Sometimes talking too much becomes a form of forgetting, an ancient strategy to avoid feeling what truly lives inside you. Because while you talk, analyze, and justify, you drift away from yourself. But when you choose silence, not the kind that's imposed, but the sacred kind, something inside you aligns. The pieces begin to fall into place. Chaos finds a center. Silence at this level is not hiding. It's returning. It's allowing yourself to hear what the noise of the world had drowned out. That soft, persistent, authentic voice of your soul. That's when you realize you have nothing to prove. You're not here to please or to fit in. You came to remember who you are. In that silence, external judgments dissolve. The need to be understood fades, and in its place, certainty arises. You don't need to be understood to have value, because your worth doesn't lie in how well you can explain your pain, but in how deeply you dare to dwell in it. Silence becomes a medicine, a way to reconnect, a mirror where you finally recognize yourself without ornaments or defenses. There's a quiet moment when something inside you changes. There are no screams, just an inner decision. I won't beg anymore. And it's not pride, it's dignity waking up. It's self-love finally rising from the ground where it knelt for so long. Because yes, you did beg with explanations, with apologies you didn't owe. That begging wasn't always obvious. It disguised itself as patience or excessive understanding. But your soul remembers it all, until one day you choose yourself. Not out of anger, but out of a love so deep that it no longer allows you to keep giving away your pieces to those who don't honor them. The soul that chooses itself stops begging, stops explaining, stops waiting. It begins to walk with boundaries, with the heart in hand, not to offer it, but to finally hold it. And in that step, everything changes. Silence becomes your companion. Solitude becomes your home. And you finally become your own safe place. Trying to convince someone that you're enough is a golden prison. The day your soul makes a promise. Never again, words shrink. You only say what truly matters. And if they don't understand, that's okay, because your truth isn't up for debate. Whoever has a soul will feel it. So lower your voice, not out of fear, but like someone guarding a treasure. Your truth doesn't need volume, only direction. There is no act more powerful than the moment you decide to go quiet. And in that silence, you choose yourself. You're not silent out of surrender, but out of self-respect. You're not silent because you fear the response, but because you finally love yourself enough to stop chasing it. Because you now know that some battles are not won through words, but through letting go. For years they taught you that your worth depended on being understood, but no one ever told you that your worth also lives in your silence, that your voice remains alive even when you don't speak. In that silence, something new begins. A reunion, a rebirth, a reconciliation with yourself. You stop trying to persuade. You stop needing to please. You simply crave peace. And peace doesn't shout. Peace settles in when you no longer bargain with your truth. So yes, silence is an act of love, of power, of maturity. Silence to avoid betraying yourself, silence to break the cycle. And in that sacred instant, true healing begins. How many times have you broken just to be understood? How many times have you drowned in explanations no one asked for just to avoid feeling unwanted? How many times have you muted your own essence, thinking that would make them love you more? And now that you've made it this far, you begin to see just how much strength lives in your silence. Maybe healing doesn't happen when you finally say everything. Maybe it happens when you no longer feel the need to say anything at all. The soul doesn't crave words. It craves presence. It wants you to stay, to hold yourself fully, to choose you. Even if no one else does. This video was a space to remind you of something incredibly important. You are not defined by your explanations. You don't need to convince anyone to deserve love. And sometimes choosing to stay silent is the deepest act of self-love you can offer yourself. So now I invite you to share in the comments the moment in your life when you first felt like you had to explain yourself all the time. Reflect on what might happen if today you decided to embrace silence, and in that silence, reconnect with yourself. If this message touched something deep within your soul, I ask you to support this channel with a big like. That small gesture helps us continue creating these spaces of depth and healing for thousands of people just like you. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you never miss the next video that will appear right here on your screen. That next video will be another step on your journey back home. Because as Carl Jung said, what you resist persists. What you accept transforms. And you are already ready to transform.